Welcome to Effective Cannabis Conversations, the show where knowledge meets curiosity and stigma takes a back seat. I'm Debi Wimberley, your advocate for all things empowering, educating, and elevating in the world for better health. Welcome back for another Effective Cannabis Conversation. Today's conversation is one for anyone who's ever felt anxious, overwhelmed, or stuck in their own mind. So basically, all of us at some time. But what if anxiety wasn't just something to manage, but something we could understand better, heal from deeper, and even use as a fuel for transformation? Joining me is Scott Lynch, host of The Motivated Mind. And together we're diving into how cannabinoid therapies and the endocannabinoid system are changing the game when living with anxiety, not just numbing symptoms, but supporting real regulation and resilience. Let's dive in. But before we do, Scott, would you please share a little bit about yourself and your background?
I love it. Debbie, thank you for having me. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, first off. So I'm Scott Lynch. I host The Motivated Mind. It's a Spotify top 100 health and fitness podcasts. We're almost at 6 or 7 million downloads now. But each week I try to bring my audience practical and tactical insights on how to master their mindset and optimize their happiness. And I specifically do that by cutting through the noise. So there's no fluff, there's no BS, there's no filter, just me. And I convey that through my storytelling skills. And so a lot of my listeners are those that like learning about things like philosophy, psychology, lifestyle hacks, entrepreneurship, or what I like to also say, dodging existential dread. And I also am the founder of a platform called Hashdash, the world's first cannabis matching algorithm, really empowering consumers to engage in what I like to call purposeful consumption. So I am a father first, then a husband, and then an entrepreneur. So I wear many hats and many titles like many of us.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and reminding us that we all wear many hats and that anxiety can definitely play a role in each one of those.
Yes.
So share with us, Scott, what inspired you to deep dive into understanding anxiety and creating the motivated mind?
So back in 2018, October of 2018, I kicked off my podcast. But the impetus to diving into mental health specifically was my best friend committing suicide in 2015. And that situation put me in a very dark place in my life because I felt like I could have done more, could have realized his pain more, could have been there more for him. And so I spent many years going to therapy, learning and understanding myself and what that situation actually meant. And through a lot of work, a lot of internal work, what I realized is there was an opportunity to take a very dark moment in my life and be able to squeeze light out of it and divert that to other people through their darkness. And so that was the impetus starting the podcast, like I said, back in October of 2018, and the rest has been history.
So I'd like to share a little bit about that and suicide from my own personal perspective. It's something that's entered my life a couple of times, being someone that lives with chronic pain and trying to deal with it, and doctors telling you there's nothing more they can do, and who wants to live in that pain. And one of the things I've done is look back at individuals that I know that have committed suicide, because we have a couple in our own family, and the impact of that, and then friends that I've known. And what I find is that people need hope and compassion at a time when they're at their darkest hour. But the other thing that I learned is that we can only understand suicide up to the point before it happens. We can ask questions of individuals that are still here with us that have contemplated it, but we can't figure out really what was the real answer of why. Because it doesn't matter. Even like one family member left a note, one didn't. It didn't fill that void and all those questions that people had. And the one thing I've learned through my own experience, because I never thought that was a place that I could land or end up, anybody can end there if they're given the right circumstances, the right time, and so much desperation, they don't know what they can do. But the thing I learned is it's really not about anyone around you. It's about you personally. And speaking about it with your friends is really hard because you don't want to put the burden on them that you're feeling that way. So could you share with us a little bit about your exploration and what you learned in doing your deep dive?
First and foremost, I think what you just hit on there, lastly, was the most important piece. I think it's about having those conversations, because I think one thing that I realized was that making a comfortable space or creating the space to have a thoughtful conversation and dialogue that isn't riddled with judgment or assumptions, you just go in with a blank slate, you're curious, was the most important piece. And I deal with this a lot with my personal coaching and those that are listeners of my podcast. And so I think the first step is really going in without judgment, with grace, without these obstructions to truly understand what's happening. And for me, I like to call the former Scott, the former me, Bob the Builder. Like, I always wanted to fix things. And I ran into this a lot in my personal relationships before I got married to my beautiful wife. And it was, I just wanted to jump in and fix. And so I really found that the best way to catch someone is, and when I say catch, I don't mean that that person's relying on you or you're a crutch, is asking the question, who do you want me to be right now? And I think that's really important because then it aligns what that person might actually need. So maybe that person just wants to express their frustration. Maybe that person wants to express the pain that they've been in. Maybe they're looking for advice. Maybe they're not, and they just want an ear and someone to hear and acknowledge that they exist. But those are very different things. And I think as a receiver of information, I was very guilty of trying to jump in and call audibles and plays and fix things. And I found that to be a very unproductive path with those that are suffering.
100%. I agree with you. And I think it's important to understand that it's not about you, the person that's having the conversation. It's about the person that you're trying to help. And remember that. It has nothing to do with you. I'm pretty sure of it. The equation has to do with the person and what they're struggling with. So allowing yourself to just understand where they are and what they're going through and being open to it without any judgment, I think, is 100% what we need to do and how we can address this, because suicide is still a very huge problem in this country and around the world. So we still haven't fixed it. So it's something we still need to be looking for answers for and addressing. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
How do you personally define anxiety, and how has that evolved over time?
So I would personally define anxiety as what happens when your brain gets stuck on the what if setting. You know, it's the most, I think, approachable way. It keeps replaying on this loop. It's like your mind is trying to game out every possible scenario, and specifically and especially the worst case ones, even when there isn't any real danger in sight. And our brains are wired that way. When we were cavemen, right, it was avoid, survive. And specifically because of that wiring, you feel jittery, uneasy, your heart starts to race. You just sense that something isn't quite right, even if you really just can't put your finger on it. And that to me is really what anxiety is. I feel it a lot in my chest and in my throat. I'll constantly look down at, when I feel that anxiety, my watch, to actually see my heart rate, to understand if it's really real or if something else is taking control and driving the wheel. And that specifically is how I would define anxiety.
And so I would take it that your perception about anxiety, since you've been studying it, has changed over time.
It has, but specifically how I address anxiety. I think I used to, and I think this is a big misnomer and myth, avoid, right? It's almost like, oh, you get a bill in the mail and you're like, oh, this is another bill, and you throw it on the stack of other bills. Well, it doesn't just mystically vaporize into the ether and you don't have to pay the bill anymore. It's still there. So how do you live with it, and what certain protocols or procedures or things can you use in your life to help deal with it? And that has been really the big difference for me.
One thing I've learned, burying your head in the sand doesn't fix it. It's not going to change it. You have to learn how to look at it and address it and see what the triggers are for you. And so I think that's really important.
Yes, and just to kind of elaborate on that, right? I think that avoidance certainly just feeds anxiety because it continues to harden the wires in our head that this situation's danger. So when I feel this way, when I feel jittery, when my heart rate goes up, when these things start to happen and I feel uncertain, when I start to overthink, overanalyze, all of those things, and you follow through with avoidance repeatedly, you're conditioning yourself that that is the subconscious pattern that you continue to do every single time. And it becomes muscle memory. And so one of the things that I have found that helps me with anxiety, and I think a lot of anxiety, is action is the best and most effective path to calm anxiety down, because the impetus and core trigger of it is uncertainty. And what does action do? Action brings clarity. And so you start to overturn rocks and you say, oh, this thing wasn't as scary as I thought it was. This thing wasn't as intimidating or as big of a problem as I fabricated in my mind. And then you can start to rewire different paths that when those feelings do come up, that jittery, that heart rate, that, okay, I understand that I'm experiencing this right now, but the best path to truly understand if it is a threat is to take action to find out. And that takes a long time. That takes repetition in perpetuity, honestly.
I really appreciate that you said that, because I think that a lot of times when we're dealing with anxiety, we're looking for outside sources to help us when we really need to be the one that's in the center trying to take charge and understand. So I really appreciate that you said that. Do you know when you first started realizing that you even had anxiety?
I don't know the exact date per se, but as I started to have greater and greater responsibilities on my shoulders, it started to increase because I told myself this story that because I have more responsibilities, one mistake could be catastrophic to the entire thing. And so then overthinking started to come into play. I started to second guess myself and overanalyze and sit in the planning phase and seek avoidance, because if I didn't do anything, then the house of cards couldn't come crashing down, right? All of these justifications. So I wouldn't say that there was a specific time or date, but more so as if we were to take this as a chart, as my responsibilities increased, there was a direct correlation with my anxiety increasing.
So would you say that you had anxiety at a young age and saw it increase, or it didn't start till you hit adulthood?
I guaranteed I had it at a young age. I've actually talked about this on my podcast before. My parents got divorced at when I was very young. And I think that was really the impetus of a lot of insecurities and self-doubt and the creation and snowball effect of the anxiety as I got older. But it definitely started as a child. However, I didn't have the self-awareness nor knowledge to understand that it existed. Therefore, I didn't know what that thing was, right? I thought, am I broken? Am I different? Is it, all of these different things that, again, stories that we tell ourselves. And it wasn't until many different, let's call it experiments or experiences in life and self-knowledge, self-education that I realized, oh, that's what it's called. It's called anxiety, right? Okay, so it has a title and a definition medically that comes along with, yeah, this kind of sounds like a lot of what I've experienced. But I would say, really, I most likely, if I went back in a time machine and was a fly on the wall to young me, guaranteed it happened in childhood.
I think we all have some anxiety as children, regardless of what's going on, whether it's going to school or anything. So I think this is something that we need to be talking about, and we're going to dive into that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
What's one myth about anxiety that you wish more people would challenge?
If I just avoid what makes me anxious, I won't feel anxious, kind of what we were talking about before. I think that is such a misnomer. It is the myth that I fell trapped to because it's that fight or flight mode, right? Like if I fly away from this thing, if I remove myself from the circumstance, therefore it makes logical sense that I won't feel this way anymore. But what we struggle to understand is that when another event similar to that thing, which is the trigger, it's going to activate that anxiety again. And therefore, you live with it in perpetuity and work around it. And then you limit yourself so much. And I think that's the biggest thing for me around anxiety is the self-imprisonment that it creates. The not taking these leaps or chances or shaking hands, right? There's so many different forms of anxiety. It severely limits your ability to truly and fully experience life. It's like walking around with a giant cinder block, multiple cinder blocks, and you're going uphill. And for what, when you can turn around and actually untie the knot and leave the cinder block behind? But again, there's so much nuance to that, of course. So I certainly don't want to oversimplify that. But I think that's the biggest myth, and everybody honestly deserves to live a life of freedom because we're only given one opportunity, one mind, one body, and one experience here on planet Earth. And you deserve that. Everyone deserves that.
Couldn't agree more. And how do you feel that living in the moment plays a part in that? Because when you allow yourself, for me anyway, when I allow myself to live in the moment and not be worried about everything that's going on or everything that I'm thinking, just grasp that moment and be there present, has made a big difference in my world of anxiety. How do you feel about that?
Yes, there are 3 dimensions we can live in every single day: past, present, or future. And thinking and worrying about the past will not influence or change the past unless you have some sort of teleportate time machine. And if you do, you're going to be a very rich individual, and tell me about it. Share it with the world. Living in the future is avoiding the ability and opportunity to actually impact the future. So the irony of living in the future is that, well, I hope for this outcome, or I want to avoid this outcome, or I want to avoid this thing, or I want this thing, or I want to create this thing. But truly, the only way to have an impression, an impact on the future is what you do today. So the only real dimension that truly matters to live in is the present moment, because the other 2 dimensions take you away from the most important dimension that has the most impact and influence on your future and who you end up becoming, or the relief that you experience, and all of these other things. And so I think that awareness and acknowledgement helps to shed the anxiety because you realize, oh, I do have control. So worrying about this thing that may or may not happen tomorrow, a year, 5, 10 years today is not only costing me time today dedicating to those thoughts, but also increasing the anxiety and clouding my ability to think clearly in the present moment. And then there's a massive domino effect from there. Understanding your emotions and what they feel like and where they're coming from, it clouds your ability to see through to all the things that are happening real time right now to you, which therefore increases the struggle that you face to address those things real time.
For sure. That is really well said. Thank you. Because all you have is today. We're not promised tomorrow, and yesterday's gone. So if you're not living for today, let's see how we can reframe that so that you can, because today is what you have and you need to enjoy it. And that I live that way every day now, having lived with chronic illness for decades. I learned that today's what I have, and I'm so happy to have it and I enjoy it. So I hope everyone hears that message.
It's almost like, I've had individuals in my personal coaching that wanted to make a certain amount of money per year. And that isn't everything. And that's a completely different conversation. But they were like, hey, I want to make $200,000 a year. And it's like, well, how much do you make today? Like 50,000. And I'm like, why are we even talking about $200,000 then? And the correlation that I'll make here is if we're so worried about the future and all of this other stuff, but yet we don't have today's present timeline and dimension under control, well, then what is the point about worrying about these other things? It's like, well, I want to paint my house blue, but I don't even have a house yet. Okay, so why even worry about the paint color then, right? And that's how my logical brain operates. And I understand not everybody's wired that way, but it has come with many years of repetition and rewiring. I'm like a master electrician now at this point and still learning every single day. But that's the way that I logically work through these gates.
Well, since you've logically worked through those gates, just share with people how much better your life is now.
Oh, if I were to put a number to it, it would be 10,000% better because it's so exhausting living that life of second guessing yourself. It's overstimulating. It is distracting. When you live a life of clarity and composure and can hear and understand what your body is telling you, there is no limitation. It's like you're living with a superpower. The challenge is that if you don't know what that feeling is like, there's nothing to compare it to, right? It's like eating a really good piece of meat. For me, I love meat and quality food. But if you have no baseline or nothing to compare it to, you don't know good from bad because you've only had this one cut of meat in this thing. All of a sudden, when you cut through all the noise and put in systems to address some of these things and manage some of these things, you realize, oh, wow. So this is what living is like. Whoa, this opportunity is over here. And you start to look at opportunity instead of downside. And that is, you talked about hope at the beginning. That is creating a highway for hope, in my opinion.
Well, and from my experience, what I can tell you is that once you've experienced that relief and are living in the moment, you want to do even better. So it even makes you work towards more of getting to know and listen to the messages that your body's sending you and being acquainted with yourself, living within yourself. And there isn't any way around that for me. That's something that I constantly am striving to do better. You know, it's hard when you've lived in that space with chronic illness and stuff. And you feel like sometimes people think you might be complaining if you say something about today and not feeling so well. And it's not a complaint. It's just that I'm recognizing this is where I am, but I want to do better. And so I'm working towards doing that. So I think that's a really critical part of the learning process and dealing with anxiety is allowing yourself to explore yourself, but then wanting to improve even better because there's always improvement.
So there's a beautiful quote that I'll share with you, and I think the audience will really resonate with this as well. It's by Anas Nin. I think it was 1994 this came out, but life shrinks or expands according to one's courage. And I love, 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 love that quote. And the reason that I really love this quote is it's a form, society has a habit of dulling down our edges. The stories we tell ourselves, what we hear just on TV and movies, all these different influences. And we all collectively start to live a smaller life than we're deserved. Whether that be through thinking, oh, I'm going to experience this pain for the rest of my life, and it is just what it is. Or I'm going to have to deal with this anxiety and the outcomes that it creates for my life for the rest of my life. But when you start to self-educate and you start to talk to people that have experienced similar things and you vocalize the things that you're going through, you start to realize that the opportunity is so much bigger than the walls you have been subconsciously collapsing in on yourself because of the natural erosion that happens with our exposure to society. And so you start living a very, very, very small life. And again, I just don't, everybody is owed that opportunity to live a much bigger life. And when I say a much bigger life, I'm not talking about jets and like these other things. It's what you define as living a bigger life. That could be pain-free. That could be, going and seeing your daughter play soccer every day. Whatever that means, living small naturally happens in this compression chamber because of the stories we're told and the experiences that we have. And it's important to put a jack in between that and open up those walls and realize, wow, life is so much bigger. There's so much opportunity. I can actually manage this anxiety or this thing that I'm going through if I have the right tools and the right systems in place.
And I'll back that up with one of my sayings. Health isn't something to wait for. It's something to achieve. And it's on you to achieve that because you're, like you said earlier, you're the only one that lives your life. You're the only one that has this life. So it's really up to you to be the guide in that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's switch a little bit and talk about cannabinoid therapies and the endocannabinoid system and the role that they play. And so when did you first become curious about cannabis and using it for dealing with your anxiety and including cannabinoid therapies into your daily routine?
I would say just over a decade ago, probably a little longer, I became questioning the options that were presented to me. So addiction runs pretty deep in my family, both alcohol and prescription drugs, pharmaceuticals. And growing up, I watched people that I loved and still love rely on these substances as coping mechanisms, but they never really addressed the root cause of the pain. And in fact, it made it worse. It made it much worse. And so I couldn't accept that these were the only paths, the only alternatives, the only options. And I didn't want to follow in those footsteps. So I started searching for something different. And I'll be honest, back in high school, I would say freshman or sophomore year, I lumped cannabis into the same category as alcohol and pharmaceuticals. And that belief was baked into and shaped from people like our DARE officer in school, propaganda, and this echo chamber that so many of us live in. But the one thing that I learned early on was to question everything and think critically. And it's that mindset that really pushed me to explore alternative options with curiosity and keyword that we discussed earlier, not judgment. And so that was the start of it. What then created hyperfuel on that journey even more was that it was inspired by my grandmother. She battled breast cancer twice, and I saw the intense pain that she went through. So I started researching ways to help her manage that pain outside of this traditional format, these pharmaceutical approaches, because she certainly wasn't going to get it from the doctors at the time or that she was visiting. And then what was the final speedway? I think of like the Hot Wheel cars that you put on a track and they hit those like little speed portions, was that I personally had a cancer scare of my own. So I went through surgery and was specifically written multiple prescriptions for pain medication. And I never went to the pharmacy to pick it up, and I managed my pain exclusively with cannabis. And those three experiences really were the start and the turning point for me. And so it shifted my entire perspective on healing and how cannabis could actually play a critical role in the wellness journey that, especially in those days, was barely talked about. And we're making progress, but it was definitely, there were no conversations happening, at least not in my side of the world.
Well, and it's a conversation that's still not happening enough, if you ask me. We need to be moving this conversation forward. But interesting enough, you talked about addiction and cancer in your family. Just those two words in themselves, how much anxiety do they provide to your life before you ever start looking at examining resources and avenues for how to deal with them?
Massive anxiety. It clouded my judgment that that was the reality that I was headed towards. Like, oh, because my, cancer is pretty prominent in my family, that's the path I was heading to. And this was the reality and the pain and the suffering that I would be leading in the future. And to me, that diminished the H word again, hope. It was like, is that like, that's really it? Right? That's really it. And here I am thinking this in my early 20s. I was like 20 years old thinking about this, and I have my whole life ahead of me. I still have my whole life ahead of me. We all have our whole life ahead of us, irrelevant of what age we're at. And that was really suffocating, demotivating, scary, and it was further intensified by what I still feel today, and especially felt back then, was not being adequately addressed by the medical society. And I am certainly not a doctor, but I can tell you through experiences, there's a lot better ways to handle physical and mental health than the ways our current medical field does it. And we talked about this off air last week. So it was really suffocating. It was like a weighted blanket, not a weighted blanket that helps with anxiety, a very much suffocating blanket.
And I find it interesting that you bring that up because I worked in the cancer field in the late 70s. And all of us, I was a medical technologist, worked in the lab, helped diagnose what cancers people have. And we all had to go through training to work with our patients and with the family members to just hone in on where they were emotionally and mentally with this diagnosis, because we interfaced with them on a regular basis. And I find it really interesting that we've stepped away from that practice in the cancer field today. We don't really approach that side of it. We just bring you in, tell you what you have, give you a list of the treatments that you can go through. And I find that not very helpful. We've gone through multiple diagnoses with my mother-in-law. And if she hadn't had me around, I'm not really sure how she might have handled that at her age. Because just hearing the C word in itself, cancer, it's like an automatic trigger in your brain. This is the worst thing that you could have ever said to me. So engaging with people and understanding emotionally where they are at with whatever diagnosis they have is really important. And helping them to relieve that anxiety becomes critical, because that's going to mean they're going to heal better, faster, and make better progress. And I really don't know where we lost that in the system, because I left that field a long time ago, but it's really sad to see.
Could not agree more.
So how do you see the endocannabinoid system fitting into the broader mental health conversation?
So your ECS is your body's built-in balance system. So I think of this as a giant board of panels, buttons, and levers. So starting out basic here for my answer, it's what helps regulate your mood, your sleep, your appetite, your pain, anxiety, basically all the stuff that keeps you feeling grounded, which we were talking about earlier, right? Being present, feeling grounded. But for a long time, I think that the ECS has been severely overlooked in mainstream mental health discussions, which we were just talking about. And ironically, it's at the epicenter of how we manage pretty much everything. And especially stress and anxiety. So I think of the ECS as it's our body's natural, let's call it chill button. I gave a fun analogy earlier. I'll throw another one on this. So when you're anxious, when you're overwhelmed, your body releases what you've probably talked about on this podcast many times with your audience, endocannabinoids. So these are the chemicals that help bring you specifically back to baseline. And that's what helps to reduce what we were talking about earlier, which is the fight or flight response. So cannabinoids like THC, CBD, those specifically are reacting with your ECS receptors, specifically CB1 and CB2. And that's why cannabis helps to promote a sense of calm for a lot of people. So what I do specifically is I pair cannabis with consistent exercise, healthy diet, and sleep. And this is where I like to think of many things in life. It's not about systems, but it's the tools that you have in your toolbox. Not one tool is going to be the end all be all for most people because our bodies are so nuanced. So all of these things are what helps to support your diet, your sleep, cannabis consumption. All of those things help to support a healthy ECS system. And then that is what helps to improve emotional regulation. Now, over time, it doesn't happen overnight. This happens over time. And I always want to express that because we're privy to the world of instant results and gratification, and that's just not the journey that we're on with cannabis. However, with that being said, there's a long-term in perpetuity outcomes for that, as opposed to just Band-Aid, Band-Aid, Band-Aid for the next 20, 40, 50 years of your life. So when your ECS is actually working optimally, all of these other things, dominoes, start to fall in the right place, right? You're not going to have eventually over time, chronic stress, poor sleep, all of these things you're able to properly address. Now, I do want to be clear that not everyone responds to cannabis or cannabinoids the same way. So everything, and you and I, Debbie, have talked about this, genetics, dosage, terpene profiles, even your current mental health state, which is so critical. All of these things play a role in it. And that's why thoughtful, personalized approaches to cannabis and ECS support are so important in the anxiety conversation that we're having today. It's one of the reasons I stated this at the beginning, why we created Hashdash. We're starting to move the needle away from this like one size fits all model of addressing mental health. So I see the ECS as this missing puzzle piece in this equation, along with pairing cannabis with things like proper diet, exercise, and sleep. So I use those collectively as one tool. I think of them as like a transformer, right? If it's missing a part, well, it's probably not going to be as effective.
And I like that you say that because I think it's really important for people to understand that we're all unique and individual, and we're supposed to be, and we should want to be. We shouldn't want to be like anyone else. Mm-hmm. And I think of the endocannabinoid system as your own internal DNA, just like not DNA, like your thumbprint. It identifies you individually. So what your ECS looks like and what someone else's ECS looks like is totally different. And there's a reason for that. And through all the trauma work that I've done, it's not unusual for people to be born with trauma and have a dysregulated ECS from the minute they're born. So, there's a whole different range of reasons why people develop anxiety and how you need to address them. But depending on how long your ECS has been dysregulated may determine how long it takes you to get it balanced again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just think that setting that up front is really important because I think a lot of people start the conversation of thinking in the pharmaceutical mindset that we've all been privy to, which is take this pill and you'll be better within 24 to 48 hours. And it's like, well, that's not the reality. And you actually taking the pill in 24 to 48 hours does not make you better because you're not even addressing the root cause. So ironic that we're even having this conversation because you're not addressing the root thing. And I think that's the most important piece with anything in life is actually getting down to the root cause of the thing instead of these band-aids that the medical field, in my opinion, currently the path that they take. It's just band-aid, 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 and move through. It's a system of production, not addressing the actual core problem with the patient or individual.
Well, we don't live in a world where we think about preventing or, really taking on it. It is just a Band-Aid, as you say. And when we're talking about the mental health field, they're the least likely to be on board with us using cannabis as a treatment today. I have someone that I work with that has just finished doing some pretty and powerful research. And so she did a survey of medical professionals in the mental health field. She works on a mental health ward at a hospital. And it was amazing the responses that she got back about how there's just no way we will ever accept cannabis as a treatment. It's bad, it's harmful, it doesn't do anything. And it's like, how far have we come into this now? We're into learning about and educating on cannabis for decades now. And we're still at that place where the medical community is not coming along. And the mental health field is the one field that seems to be the most reluctant. So I would just caution anyone, if you're going to speak to a mental health professional, to be sure before you do mention cannabis that know that they're going to be receptive to it, because it could land you in a position that you're not real comfortable with. So just want to make sure that I throw that out there. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, I would just say this is something that I've experienced myself on my podcast. I don't remember how long ago, but I had brought up cannabis consumption. And again, a mental health podcast, you would think that those things they go hand in hand, right? The opposite is true. And I remember the backlash and the comments that I got on that episode, to the point where I actually decided to bring on the podcast one of our science advisors at Hashdash, who is Dr. Riley Kirk, who you've had on the podcast and has created content, I think, with effective cannabis, etc. And to talk about the main goal of that was breaking down the myths of cannabis. And still, I would say that it was maybe 70-30 for responses. 70% of people were like, wow, this was really eye-opening, and you still had 30% of people that were just stuck in their ways. But again, I try to have, using that G word, grace, and empathy for people to understand, like, listen, I was one of those people before. I mentioned that earlier. I put cannabis in the same category as alcohol and pharmaceuticals, and I was so wrong. And there's nothing wrong with being wrong at all. It's a good thing. It shows, oh, we're actually growing. We're learning. Okay. Now I can do better now that I know better.
Absolutely. And I just think it's really important that we are having these conversations, because it is through personal experiences and sharing what we've accomplished for ourselves that really gives us the data that we need to show that this really is making an impact. And we do see it over and over again, how many people are using cannabis for anxiety and so many other health conditions, and they are finding results. But that's knowing how and having the correct guidance. And you had talked about the different cannabinoids a little bit earlier. Do you use all of them, or do you use just one specific?
Primarily THC and CBD, 1-to-1 ratio specifically. But outside of that, not really. And the only reason for that is I feel like I personally, even being a decade in this industry, I'm still learning every single day. And I do like to be confident in what I'm consuming. And it's not that I fear these other cannabinoids, etc. It's that I still am learning more that I don't feel as confident about them. And all of a sudden, next week, a new study has come out. There's over 15,000 studies on cannabis that contradicts that previous study. It's actually one of the things that really has interested me in Dr. Riley Kirk's content, is that she's able to take very complex studies on cannabis and break them down in a very digestible format. And it's something we try to do with #2 as well, because cannabis is very intimidating. It's made up of over 500 compounds, and we're learning every single day, and there's over 15,000 clinical studies out there. However, we're still learning more every single day, but that shouldn't be a reason to avoid these things. It should be all the more reason to do your own due diligence.
Well, and different cannabinoids really help focus in on and address certain things. So not all cannabinoids are good, maybe, for everyone. So,
Correct.
it's just because the plant produces all that doesn't mean that you have to have access to all that. So let's talk a little bit about THC, because we often hear in research, and we also hear people talk about how THC makes you anxious instead of helping you with your anxiety. I know it can do both. It can help you, but it can make you anxious. If you overconsume, have too high a quantity, it depends on your system, it can make you anxious. So could you speak to that a little bit?
One of the biggest things, we spend a lot of time in dispensaries, whether they're medical or whether they're adult use. And the number one thing I hear consumers often say, and I'll speak to the adult use recreational market. I don't want to overstep my boundaries per se, but the biggest request is, what's your highest THC product for your lowest price point? And I think that is such a dangerous game to play. It's like walking into the liquor store and saying, what's your highest proof alcohol, and walking out. I can guarantee you're not going to have a good time. For me, I try to keep it below anywhere from 17 to 15% THC. How do I know that? Repetition, test, trial and error over years and years of consumption. For anything over, it's also why I stay away from concentrates, specifically because normally 99.99% of the time, I am not looking to melt into the couch or be blasted off to the moon. But again, this is what works for me. I want to be clear-headed. I want to feel present and grounded. I want to feel like almost if someone threw a baseball behind me, I would be able to catch it because I'm so focused in just being here. Higher THC ratio normally does the complete opposite for me. And if anything, after that 17% to 18%, depending what else is in the cannabis product too, it then has the opposite effect where I have heightened anxiety and paranoia. Like, does this person know I've consumed, or, am I looking goofy? All of these other things that you've heard many, many other people express. And so that's specifically the sweet spot for me. But again, everybody is different. So I would say experimentation. And if you are walking into a dispensary, number one and best thing that you can ask for is to see COAs. Those are the most important to actually understand what's in the product. And hopefully you're engaging with an individual that knows what they're talking about too, because I've come across a lot of that in dispensaries. And so that's really important. And how do you understand if they do or don't? By doing your own due diligence, by doing your own research, whether it be through Effective Cannabis. At #, we have 9 different guides and over 71 chapters of content that our Science Advisory Board has put together. So it's by doing your own due diligence.
Well, and we do know that, like, some people that struggle with PTSD can use higher levels of THC, and it's very helpful. So it's really important in understanding what you're treating and why you're treating it. So you talked about COAs. Can you just share with the audience what a COA is? Because some people may not know that are tuning in right now.
Certificate of Analysis. This is what's going to break down everything from the cannabinoid profile, terpene profile, mold or mildew. And this will vary state to state, by the way, so I can't speak broadly across the board, but that's what a COA is going to tell you. It is you mentioned the word fingerprint earlier. It is the fingerprint of the product that is very unique to that specific product that was tested by a licensed lab. So a licensed lab within their state, every single time you're producing a cannabis product, there's a certain percentage of that batch that is sent to the lab for testing to ensure that it is what you say it is, that it's okay for the consumer to consume, which means doing pesticide testing to ensure that there weren't any illegal pesticides used on the products. Mold and mildew counts are at a certain percentage. The terpenes that are in that specific product, the cannabinoid breakdown, and what those percentages look like. And again, testing is going to vary state to state, but actually on our platform, we have a whole guide on how you can actually read a COA thoughtfully.
And COAs are really important. I think it's really important that a patient understand or a consumer understand what a COA is. And I would love for them to read like a recipe, that simple. So that you can, because anybody can pick up a recipe and make sense out of it. And so I would love to see them read that simple so that people can really understand what they're about to put in their body. So what would you say to someone who is anxious but afraid to try cannabis? And how could you support them because of the stigma that they might be going through?
I love this question. So first and foremost, because we talked about root cause earlier to make sure I don't put foot in mouth, first, I'd really encourage them to get curious about what the specific stigma, what is the stigma itself that they came across, that they've encountered? Because every single one that I've faced over the past decade has been rooted in misinformation and outdated narratives. And most of us have, listening to this. Then from there, I would suggest taking a step back to reflect on how they've internalized that stigma. So what do I mean by internalize? Where did it come from? Why does it hold so much weight to you? And this goes back, Debbie, to our conversation earlier. Why that's so important is because often the stories we tell ourselves are inherited from our parents, our teachers, childhood experiences, traumas, societal conditioning. But when we actually start to dissect and investigate, and we come to these different conclusions, and one of them most commonly is that, oh, that's where that story came from, and oh, it's outdated and it's unhelpful. And we then realize this no longer serves me. So we stop avoiding the things that might actually help us when we go through that process and that system. I talked about how systems is so important. That is one of the systems that I think I would suggest anybody implore. And we talked about this a little bit earlier too as well, but I do not use the word entitled very often. I don't say that actually at all. I mostly don't care for that word. But with that being said, big asterisk, everyone is entitled to relief. Very along the lines, Debbie, of your saying. So living your entire life in pain or fear just because of someone else's belief, and ironically, by the way, probably no longer serves them too as well. It's not noble. It's a slow, quiet form of just pure suffering and perpetuity. And I would say lastly, you don't need to dive in head first. When it comes to experimenting and testing cannabis, start small, you learn, you try low doses, you track how you feel, and you rinse and repeat over time. And that's how you get the answers that you've arrived at and that I continue to arrive at. And then lastly, I would just say, listen, relief doesn't require a leap of faith, just a first step. That's all. And that's literally with everything. If you're trying to create a new habit, if you're trying to break a bad habit, it's not going cold turkey on things. It's just one step. It's not a giant leap of faith. It is one step, and you build upon that foundation.
And for me, cannabis, I would say, is a teaching plant. It has taught me a lot about my health, about myself, the way I think, the way I address and communicate with my family. It's really allowed me to learn a lot. And that starts with you using very small doses to begin and not get in a rush to I've got to get relief 100% on everything today. It doesn't work that way. Allow yourself to set with the plant and listen to your body and see what it's saying and learn from it. It takes lots of note keeping and tracking and understanding what is working and what isn't working, because there's lots of choices out there. And what works for one may not work for the next person. So it's just you being, it's, what I call trial and error. But don't give up, because you will land on something most generally, not everyone. It doesn't work for everyone. But when I work with someone, it constantly comes up, well, this didn't work. Well, there's a lot of questions that come back, which goes back to your what if. Well, what if you tried a smaller dose? What if you tried something else? What if you tried it at a different time? So, it's always questioning and reevaluating and giving it time. Don't look for that automatic gratification. So we're getting close to ending our conversation here, and there's one question I want to leave you with. As a parent, and I know you have a 2-year-old, how do you hope the world evolves in how we talk about and address anxiety, so that our kids grow up with better emotional coping tools than we did?
Oh, I love our daughter. She's amazing. And I would say this. First, I think it starts with conversations like we're having, sharing our experiences. That's what's going to really empower others to have these types of conversations. And this is so full circle to our opening conversation. So I think it's beautiful bow that's tied. But there are more than, I think it's 300 million people worldwide that deal with anxiety. And unfortunately, statistically speaking, only 1 in 4 people with anxiety receive any form of treatment because of things like stigma, lack of awareness, and limited access to care. And so why I gave the answer that I gave, it's because conversations start to break those stigmas. Then that builds awareness, and greater cannabis acceptance then means greater access to care. And so it's a full circle, but the first stepping stone when we talked about just taking one step is having conversations with each other. And it's something that my wife and I are very adamant about with our daughter, is just talking through, what emotions are you experiencing right now? How does that make you feel? What? So she understands and can make the correlation between those two things and can thoughtfully navigate in a healthy fashion these different experiences that she's having. But that doesn't happen if the conversations aren't happening and the education isn't out there. And it all starts with communication and what we're doing here today.
And I think that's so important what you said there, conversation, but asking and communicating with your children. Just asking them, how do you feel today? What happened in your life today? How did that make you feel that happened in your life today? I think those are something that we need to all be doing as grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, so that they know it's okay to have these conversations. I grew up in a time period where you didn't dare talk about mental health at all. If you did, they were going to lock you away. So being able to have these conversations is critical. It's like getting to know the person sitting next to you, getting to know something about them. It's not you should never be ashamed of expressing how you're feeling and what that made you feel like. Because I guarantee you, when you do, there's probably somebody else that has felt the same way and they can relate. And then that's when you can really explore, how can we get past that? So I love that you said that. Thank you. So thank you for being here. I really appreciated this conversation. I hope that our audience walks away with a lot of tools. I will put all of your information in the bio below so that anybody can get in touch with you. We are also starting a partnership, working together, # an effective cannabis newsletter, to educate, because education is such a critical piece, regardless of what methods you want to use to manage your health and take care of your life. Everybody deserves to live the absolute best life possible, whatever that may be for you today. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. I had a lot of fun, and I hope that this conversation brings a ton of value to people. I think it will, so I'm excited.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder, The information we're sharing today is for health awareness only. It is not medical advice or a substitute for consulting your doctor. It is here to help you learn, ask the right questions, and make informed decisions about your health and your care. We so appreciate you dropping in. Your time and support are invaluable as we strive to educate and advocate for the transformative potential of medical cannabis. Remember, you have only one health and one life, and no one lives them but you. Let's continue this journey together. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest conversations. Your comments and engagement fuel the dialogue we need to create change. Until next time, stay empowered and keep exploring the wonders of your endocannabinoid system.